Welcome to the Motivation Lab, episode 3. So I'm going to talk a little bit about something that really actually inspired this entire idea. And here it is, right? So one of the things I was most proud of as I led organizations in the regional organization that I had at my last stop was that I had a group of about 50 people. And one of the things that I was most proud of is that every time we would have a regional meeting, it was an event. Because for me, the focus was not just to have a series of talking heads from the company show up at our meeting and then talk to people for 2.5 days. That for me was not productive. Now, having them do it, that was great. But I always found a way to cap that time and segment it aside of the meeting. The bigger purpose for me was to find a way to foster learning, to develop our skills, and to really align with the things that we were doing in that moment over the course of that year, right? Or if I was preparing for the next year, right? So we might do planning exercises, for example. We may do brainstorming exercises, but I usually wanted to reserve some time to find a way to inspire people in ways that would come from outside of the business environment, right? And so some people would go, why in the heck are you doing this? So who cares about this? Just do your job, right? A Bill Belichick thing, do your job. For me, doing your job meant being inspired to do your job. Now, I'm not necessarily responsible for inspiring people. I really think people have to find ways to inspire themselves. But I wanted to create an environment where people would be motivated and inspired. But I also created systems, obviously, that would support that. You just can't tell people, hey, be inspired, or famously, hey, you're the CEO of your territory. That's great. But you need to create the conditions that really create that outcome. That's what you really, really, really want to see. So one of the things I would do is I would create time that would be devoted to some form of inspiration, right? So in one meeting, I was talking to my team, and one of my associates, her name was Kathy Westling, actually, she had an idea that she had actually already done with her team. So I'm not taking credit for this idea. In fact, you may even be familiar with this idea, but if you're not, this could be really helpful. So what Kathy shared with me is in her team, they had come up with an exercise that one of her people had shared with her, which was come to the meeting with a picture of somebody or something that inspired you, and then share the story. So you can imagine with 50 people in the room, it takes a little while to get through this. But I can share with you, number one, I laid the stage for this by creating a PowerPoint, and if I have the courage, I'll attach it. And I went through a series of the people who have inspired me or have inspired others, and some of them were unconventional sources of inspiration, right? So that was one thing. And I ended, by the way, sharing a story about how my wife inspires me. Now, you're thinking I'm trying to get husband points, but she inspires me in an incredible way. And at some point in the future, maybe I'll give you more details around that, but she's an incredibly inspirational person to me and to our kids. And that was a big thing for me. But I will tell you, most of the people shared stories of family members. That's what really inspired them, a mother, a father, etc. But a lot of them were coaches, or they were friends, or they were acquaintances. So you didn't necessarily see a lot of historical figures. But I will tell you, when we started this exercise, I was blown away. I mean, really, I cannot tell you. We took about, I think, 2.5 hours to get through the exercise, and everybody told their story. And there were multiple times over that period when people were crying. You could see it. I cried, other people cried. The inspiration was unbelievable, especially when you get really, really personal, right? So the idea isn't to make people feel vulnerable because they're sharing an incredibly personal story. It is what happens when people do that, but it also creates connections at work that you might not otherwise have. You learn about people that you would not necessarily know, for example, and so it is a way of breaking down barriers, for example, breaking down silos and creating a narrative, a positive narrative, because the question is what's inspiring to you, right? This is a focus on positivity. You may think that's a cliche, you may think it's overwrought, whatever. That's what I'm after, and that's what that moment was for me. It was inspiring. And that's how I came to the Motivation Lab, because I thought those things and other things I've done, and I mentioned another video that I used to read children's books, for example, and that was because I was reading children's books to my daughter at the time, and I thought, what the heck? Again, I'm sure the people thought it was a little weird. In fact, I know one of my people used to mimic me doing it, but I looked for a lot of other things to do and more conventional ways to do it, but that's the point. Now, the question for you then is really straightforward. Who inspires you, right? So you don't necessarily have to post a picture. I'm not even sure we have the facility to do that. But you can share a brief story in the comments section at my Facebook page at I am Joseph Rupp. Or if you remember the Motivation Lab, you can obviously do it there. The idea is, Who has inspired you and why? And if you want to do this with your teams, you've got the same thing. Now, there are next level questions that you could go through, but for this one, let's keep it simple. And I'm probably going to come back to this thematically later on. Thanks so much for stopping by. Again, welcome to the Motivation Lab.